Hey guys, on to chapter 12, which talks about payroll, preparing payroll, everyone's favorite chapter. We discuss taxes, employee payroll, payments, payroll register, all kinds of fun stuff. This should not stress you out as much. It is kind of like if you already have a job and you clock in and out of your job and you calculate your own pay. This is what this is. The first part talks about, paying employees. How do we do it? What are the different types of payments? You can be paid hourly, which is a wage. You could be paid salaried, which is a fixed annual amount. Annual is yearly, so you could be paid $60,000 a year. That would be a salary, and you get divided up among pay periods. Or you get paid $7 an hour. And if you work for 40 hours, you could make 7 times 40. If you work for 60 hours, you'd make 7 times 40. On a salary, it doesn't matter how many hours you work. You get paid the same amount every week. Then there's commission. So that's like realtor agents and those kind of individuals who, maybe insurance, the more you sell, the more money you make for yourself. That's commission. The total amount paid by a business for an employee's work earned by a wage, salary, or commission is called total earnings. So any of those calculated together is total earnings. That's what's paid to the employees who work. Sometimes this could be referred to as gross pay, gross wages, or gross earnings. So then we get into the word pay period, which I'd mentioned before. This is just those number of days or weeks of work covered by an employee's paycheck. Some of you are probably paid weekly. Some of you are probably paid bi-weekly. Some of you are probably paid, probably none of you, semi-monthly, only twice a month, or monthly. Those last two are kind of rare. Usually we're paid every 2 weeks bi-weekly. And then the term payroll. This is the total amount earned by all employees for a pay period. So that would be your payroll amount. So adding up all the employees' pay, and for one period is called the payroll. That's why we call it payroll. There's payroll accountants, and there's HR that handles payroll, and they say we need to put you on the payroll. That's the total amount earned by all the employees for a certain amount of time. Then we have a payroll clerk. That is the accounting individual that handles all of the calculations and prepares the journals and posts the entries and things like that. So we can move on now to calculating employee hours worked. So here we see this time clock. This is so vintage, let's say vintage. I don't think that's the word, but we have the employee number, the name, John, pay period, December 15th. That's when it ended. So it was probably 2 weeks prior, all of his information. So we have the dates, when they clocked in, when they clocked out, when they clocked in, when they clocked out in the afternoon, and nothing for the evening. Add those together, total of 8 hours. Add those together, he worked a total of 8 hours. Those rows together, he worked a total of 8 hours, but anything over 40 is overtime. So, for the sake of the textbook, they do not use salary. They use wage-based, so hourly rate. So we will be calculating overtime. And for this example, it probably says over here on the side that anything over 40 hours in a week is overtime. And if they work on a weekend, it's probably overtime. So that's what's happening here. They show Monday through Tuesday the 3rd, and they calculated 8 hours regular pay. And then Friday the 12th, they calculated 8 hours of regular pay. By Saturday, I'm assuming John has already worked overtime So if he reached 40 hours by Friday, 4 extra hours goes into the overtime column. And then Monday he restarts. So John worked 88 hours in regular hours and 6.5 hours in overtime. And it's important to recognize the overtime because you get paid more for the overtime. And that's what's going to happen down here. We want to calculate the number of regular hours for each day. And we did that. We entered the amounts. And then part 2 is calculate the overtime hours. They did that. It's literally just taking 833, 602. You just count the difference in there, and it's 2.5 hours. And then we get the 8.88 and then the 6.5. But on this page is where they calculate the overtime, I think. Yes, it's coming up. So they showed this, the first one. This first one is just like a time clock sheet that you would write your hours in. The next section talks about time clock systems. So you like go in and you actually punch in your hours and the computer keeps the information for you. Maybe you have a pin or a badge, and some schools have it. You have to scan your key card to get in, and then it clocks your hours. So some people do it digitally, some people do it by hand. When I worked at the Rollers, we did it by hand. When a employee walked in, they wrote their time down, and when they walked out, they wrote their time down. Then I could pay them for overtime or regular rate, etc. So calculating the hourly employee total. So here it says that the law requires businesses involved in interstate commerce to pay employees at least 1.5 times their normal hour rate for any hours worked over 40 hours a week. So we call that time and a half. 1.5. So here it is. We took the total hours that he worked, 88 hours, times his $15 regular rate. It told us that somewhere. His regular earnings is $1,320. Now we need to calculate his overtime rate. So we take his normal rate, times it by 1.5 to get his overtime rate of $22.50. Okay, so John, we first calculated how many hours he worked, then we went right in and said, okay, 88 hours times his regular pay, and we get a regular earnings. Then we want to find the overtime rate. Regular rate times 1.5 equals the overtime rate. Then we want to say, okay, how much do we have in overtime earnings? Well, we take 6.5, which was the hours from the previous 6.5 was overtime, times the overtime rate, and we get an overtime's earning, and we just add those together. So he's earned $1,466.25. So chapter 12.1 really just talks about, how are employees paid? Like, what are those keywords at the beginning? You learn those keywords. Then we dug into this time clock. So how do we calculate the time clock? And so, again, 8 a.m. to lunchtime, that's about 4 hours, and 1 to 5 is about 4 hours, so we have 8 hours. We have the time clock. Then we go into a time clock systems, more technology, and then go into, okay, we know how many hours they worked, how much are they really getting paid? Well, we multiply it by the regular rate, but if he's worked over 40 hours, then he gets time and a half, which is his regular rate plus half of it. So 22.5 is how much he gets in overtime. And then you want to calculate the overtime rate. So that is it for the lesson. Tune back in for 12.1.